Hey, what's up everybody? Jason here. Today I'm going to be reviewing the Console 1 from Softube. So this is a hardware interface, basically acts as a MIDI controller that allows you to control Softube plugins. And if you are a Universal Audio ecosystem user, you can also control Universal Audio plugins through the Apollo system that is integrated completely with this. So I'm going to be testing this out in 3 different DAWs because depending on the one that you have, you get a little more or a little less control for certain things like automatic track select, automatic track naming, and then the ability to control some sends and panning and volume is different depending on the DAW that you have. I'll do a general overview of the hardware layout plus the plugins that you can load into each of those sections, and then just show you some examples in those 3 different DAWs. So first, getting into the actual layout of the device. Going from left to right, there's your input section, your main processing section, and your output section. So input allows you to adjust the input gain, the high and low cut. You can filter the low and high cut to your compressors through a sidechain. So there's a toggle button here that if you have that enabled, it will not control the high and low cut from the input signal. It will send that through to a sidechain to the compressor. The display buttons across the top basically turn it on or off in your DAW, and the mode button allows you to select from 3 different modes. So you can have the full screen display on, hit the mode button again, and it will stick it down in the bottom in a little bar so it's kind of out of your way. The other things to note about the input section is there is a fine adjust setting. So if you're holding that button down and making adjustments, it makes smaller steps so you can do more fine-tuned adjustments. The shift button basically controls all of the functions that you see in any of the orange or yellow, depending on what color you're seeing, text across the top. So if you wanted to say, for example, save a preset, hold the shift button down, click on Save Preset, and that will save it. So moving on to the main processing area, there's 3 different options here: shape, EQ, and compressor. All of those have a bypass option, so basically you're clicking these buttons to turn them on or off. And they all have the basic types of functions that you would expect from those processors. So starting with shape, you've got a meter up at the top that shows you how the level is being affected by the shape processing. You've got a gate release, sustain, punch, and a hard gate option. So basically the punch, as you're rotating it clockwise, that will increase the emphasis of the transient, giving you more attack and more punch, and then it will soften that transient if you're rotating it counterclockwise. Sustain basically works the same way. Rotate it clockwise, it will increase the sustain. Rotate it the other way, it will decrease it. So the EQ section, there is 4 different spectrums here. There is low, mid, high, and high. So the low and the highs both give you the option to have a cut, a bell, or a shelf for those. And then the 2 middle sections, the low mid and the mid high gains, you can adjust the frequencies there, and you can also set the slope of the EQ. So if you wanted to have a wide band versus a narrow band, you can do that as well. Compressor has all of your basic compressor settings that you would expect. There is a gain reduction meter up at the top, ratio, attack, release, threshold, and a parallel, dry, wet settings. Now going into the output section, this is where it might be a little different depending on the DAW that you have. So this will control the drive and the character with whatever harmonics plugin that you're using. If you do have a DAW that supports the other functions, this will also allow you to adjust sends, 3 auxiliary sends, plus your panning and your volume. So on the Softube website, there's a chart that I'll put up here that shows you which DAWs support what. So I am going to do a test with Reaper, the latest version, Logic Pro, the latest version, and Cubase Elements LE 10.5, just to show you some of the differences that you'll get with certain DAWs. Finally, across the top, these are your track control options. So you've got a page plus or minus. So if you have more than 20 tracks in your song, you can move between pages of tracks. Obviously, all of your track selects here up at the top. A grouping option, which is pretty cool. So you could group tracks together, and then if you are adjusting the volume of those, it will relatively adjust the volume of whatever tracks that you've grouped together. And then there's also a copy function. So if you wanted to copy settings from one track to another, you can do it there as well. Finally, up in the top right is processing order. So if you wanted to process, say, the EQ and then the shape and then the compressor, you can toggle those from the buttons up across the top. And then in the top right are the external sidechain options. So if you remember, there was a filter to compressor option down here. That filters it through a sidechain. So if you enable that, this is where you would actually control how that external sidechain works. So the first interesting thing to notice about this is the construction. Mine's got a little bit of a rattle in it because I did buy mine used. If you saw any of my other videos, it was actually a pain to get this to work because you have to use a license code to install it, and I had a bit of a pain going back and forth with Softube to actually get it because I bought this as a demo product that was already used and activated. So first, let's talk about the install procedure. The install procedure is pretty simple. If you don't have any existing Softube plugins, you will have to register for a Softube account, and then you'll see it listed in your product section once you register it. So the package has a card with an activation code that you put in. It will show up there, and then in your Softube Central manager, which is basically like any other plugin manager, like the Waves plugin manager, you'll see your console 1 selected there as well, and all your updates and activations will be shown there. Now it does require you to have an iLok, and it does not support iLok Cloud, so you'll have to have your little dongle with you to be able to use it. So once you have it activated, you have it added to your Softube account, you'll get another application here, the console 1 on-screen display, and that's basically the little widget that runs in your little system tray here that makes the device work. So here you can, it's got a link to the manual, you can reset the hardware if anything goes wonky, or you can quit as well. So if I get rid of all this stuff, and I'll switch into Logic. So once you are in your DAW, the best way to know what your DAW supports is to put the plugin on a track, because whatever track you want to use this plugin, or the hardware on, sorry, you'll have to add the console 1 plugin to each one. So if you click the little settings icon, that will show you whatever options are available. So these are the options that Logic supports. So Logic does support track name and number. And what that basically does is it synchronizes the track name from your DAW to the actual hardware when you have the plugin turned on. I'll show you Reaper in a minute, which gives you some additional options as well. So I have those turned on, and if I enable this, can now see that Guitar 1, you can see that down there at the bottom. If I turn this off and I add another track, so let's just duplicate this a couple of times and change the name. If I add bass and drums, if I pop up the console 1 plugin, they're down there at the bottom already. So Logic does not support the volume and panning, so if I minimize this with the modes, you can see I can switch back between the tracks. I'm controlling the bass, the guitar, or the drums, but it will not control the volume. So you can see the volume on the plugin is moving. That's just the output volume of the plugin itself. That's not the track volume. Same thing for pan. It will control the pan for the output of the console 1 plugin, but not the panning in your DAW, whereas Reaper does support those as well. The other interesting thing to notice with those extra features that I will show you with Reaper, if I turn on this display, I'll adjust the drive and the character on the far right. These are the controls that control your auxiliary sends. So you hold the shift key, but if I do that, this won't change. So this will just still control the drive and the character because Logic doesn't support that. So loading plugins into the console 1. There's a couple of ways to do it. One is you can just load presets. So down in the bottom left, there's a preset option. So these are the ones that are built in. There is channel strip, compressor, EQ, shape, and user presets. So like I mentioned, it's cool that you can use the default SSL channel strip with the console 1, but if you do own other Softube plugins, or you're using Universal Audio and you're in their Apollo system, you can load individual plugins for your shape, your EQ, and your compressor. So if I wanted to just load the SSL 4000, I have that option here. Now I already paid for the Summit Audio console. If you haven't paid for that, you wouldn't see that option there. So you pick that, you choose a preset, and now there you go. So it will automatically load that entire channel strip in. Now let's just say I don't like the dynamic shaper with the SSL. So one thing you'll notice, the top right will actually tell you what channel strip you have loaded. So if I wanted to replace, say, that dynamic shaper with another one, hold down Shift, click on Shape, and then now it's going to detect what other shape plugins you have installed. So I bought the Volume 4 package from Softube, so I've got a bunch of them there. So if I switch this out, now I'm going to be using the transient shaper, and you can see that the options on the screen have changed. So now I have the option to control the sustain band, the crossover frequency, and then still I get sustain and punch, but the toggle button here switches from fast to slow punch. And that's the same for all of them. So if you notice over here on the right, the compressor has the basic compressor setting, so I can adjust the ratio, I can adjust the attack, the release, the wet dry, and the overall threshold. But if I wanted to, say, use the Drummer S73, same thing, Shift, Compressor. Now this is going to bring up all the different compressors. Choose the Drummer 73. And you can see how the options change, and the options will actually match what options that plugin has. So if I load the Drummer plugin here, this has a few different settings. Turn this back on. So now I can adjust the style. So instead of the ratio, controlling the ratio, this is actually controlling the style. So clarity, clarity 1, clarity 2, neutral, gentle, more air, etc. The air is just a toggle, so you hit past a 50% threshold and it toggles it on or off. You can still adjust the parallel signal, and you can adjust the amount. You can adjust the output volume, but there's no other option here for using the release knob. So you could MIDI map this maybe to something else if you wanted to, but it is aware of whatever plugins that you have loaded there. So if you wanted to maybe use, say, the FET compressor instead, load that, click OK. Now that's going to put back all of the original settings because the FET compressor has the same ones. So same thing goes for EQ. It's going to detect whatever EQs that you are able to add there, and it will adjust them. So if you see the EQ options that are available here, if I switch this to the active EQ and load that, now I'm going to get just whatever parameters are available for that plugin. So that's actually pretty cool because I did invest quite a bit in those plugins, and I do have a lot of presets with the American Class A. So I can just go into the, not the shape one, sorry, let's cancel that. I'll go into strip, and I can load the American Class A console. And then now that's going to load the settings. You can see up in the top right, there's the American Class A up at the top. And then now I can go into user presets if I had any saved in there and migrated, and I can load those in as well, which is pretty neat. Okay, so some of the other cool things that you can do with this, like I mentioned, it has a high and low pass filters that you can adjust on the actual input signal. Or if you have this option enabled, filters to compressor, you can see that it activates on the screen. It just brightens up that part of the text. Same for phase inversion. If you want to invert the phase, you can toggle that on or off. Here I have this set to bypass to compressor, so it's going to adjust the actual values here, but you won't see it reflected in the EQ because it's not processing it that way. It's going to be processing it through your sidechain. So right now this is turned off. You can activate this, so it's going to do for your shape or your compressor. So you can see how the options change. Here it's turned off. Here it's going to the compressor, so I can adjust. You can see the sidechain filters that it has set down there, and if I switch it to shape, now you can see external sidechain is enabled on the shape option there. So the other cool things you can do is you can copy and paste from track to track. So let's just turn this off for a second. Let's say I did another guitar track, and let's call that guitar track 4. If I had my guitar 1 track settings the way that I wanted it, so I've got this kind of dialed in however I want this to work, the drive, the character, the transients, sustain, punch, whatever I want this set up for, you can copy this. So the way that you copy it, up at the top here, there's a copy button. So you press and hold, and then now you pick the tracks you want to copy it to. So I want to copy this to the 4th track. So this will be copied to track number 4, and then you release the copy button, and now it is copied over to track 4. So if I switch, boom, the exact same settings are there. So now for grouping tracks together. So grouping works kind of weird. Let's just take a look at the volume I have set up here. So I'm going to put this volume at, say, 0. And I'm going to hold down the find control so I can get this right to 0. And I'm going to change track 2 to be, let's just say, 10. And I'm going to change track 4 to be minus something or other. Now, grouping allows you to relatively change the volume of any of those tracks. So if you notice, again, track 1, 0, track 2, 10.2, track 4, negative 24. So if I group these together, you press and hold group, select tracks 1, 2, and 4 is already highlighted. You can see them highlighted on the screen. Now if I release, those are grouped together. It doesn't persist, but what I can do now is you'll notice that this volume is set for negative 24.7. If I move this up to 0, and now if I switch to track 1, it's cranked all the way to 18, and track 2 is cranked all the way to 18. So it's relative volume up to the maximum 18 dB. Honestly, I couldn't think of why I would really use this feature. I guess it would be kind of helpful if you weren't making use of track stacks in Logic or any other type of summing channel, but it's a feature nonetheless that you can use if you find it valuable. The other thing with the controls is going into your overall settings. So holding Shift and hitting track 20, this will bring up some other options that would also be customized to your DAW. So you can see these two are grayed out at the top as far as renaming and rearranging tracks. Logic doesn't support that. Cubase does, so I'll show that in a second as well. So you get some other options for adjusting your display settings, view modes, and of course legal notices and some other things. Other than that, the integration is pretty solid. Everything pretty much works great right out of the box. The last things I guess to be aware of, the solo and mute are down at the bottom right. So you can solo individual tracks or mute. So if I wanted to solo, pick a bunch of these, I could solo 3 of those. Now if I wanted to clear all of those, instead of having to go through all 3 tracks and do it, I can hold Shift, press all. So now this is telling me that a parameter that you're going to change will now be affected for all of them. I can press solo, and now it's going to wipe all those out. So it's another kind of option on top of using the grouping feature, which is really cool. Again, I showed this in the opening with the controls. This just allows you to adjust the order of processing, but it doesn't actually change it on the screen. So overall, it is very, very simple to use. The response is very quick. So now let's get into Reaper, and I'll just show you some of those additional options that you would get if you're using a DAW that supports VST3s. All right, so I've closed Logic completely, opened up Reaper, and the first thing that you'll notice, and I showed you this with the little Logic example, I'm going to add a track. I'll call this guitar, and I'll add the Console 1 plugin. So the one thing to troubleshoot, I guess, if you find some functions aren't working, is make sure you've loaded the VST3 version of the plugin. So if I load the AU version of Console 1 into that track and add that, I won't get the same options that are supposed to be supported by Reaper. So right here you can see click to set track name, whereas in Logic it had the track name there automatically. So if I click on the settings here, I don't see any options. So make sure that when you do add the plugin, let me get rid of this, remove all of these. When you do add it, add the VST3 version of the plugin, and then now when I go into settings, here's all the extra options that you get with Reaper. So sidechain support, controlling DAW functions like volume and panning, track selection, name, and number are already done out of the box. So if I open up the console 1, here I get that alert again. So if you're using multiple DAWs for whatever reason, you'll get that notification. But at least the first time you use it, it's going to tell you what it will support, because I don't think the documentation on the website is exactly up to date. So here's the things that you can do: DAW control, track selection, transferring track name and number. Hit OK to clear that. And you can see guitar is down here already, which is pretty cool. So if I minimize this mode and kind of move it out of the way, right away, now that that plugin is installed, you'll notice that, sorry if I pop this up and make sure I have track 1 selected. There we go. The volume is, you can control the volume, and you can see the pan is being controlled as well, whereas Logic, it didn't control that. So the next additional benefit that you get is using these 3 options, the drive character, and the pan, to control your sends. So I'll add a new track. Let's get this out of the way. Insert a new track. Let's just call this verb. And let's just add a reverb plugin. All right, so now if I go to that first track and turn this on, I'll have to actually set up the routing first. So I'm going to do a send out to the verb channel. Open this up, put mode on full. Now when I hold the shift key down, you'll notice on the right side it changes. So now if I want to control the volume in the DAW, this will always still control the volume. This will always still control the pan when it's not selected. But if I hit shift, it will actually allow me to control the send. Now I don't have that view option enabled there. So if I turn this full view back on, now here we go. I can adjust all of the individual sends. So that is actually a pretty cool option. I hope they build that into Logic, even though I'm getting really fed up with Logic. I've had so many problems with it just kind of changing things on its own or getting these random disk write errors. And I have a 2017 MacBook Pro. It should be plenty fast enough, 16 gig of RAM, SSD drive, but I'm just getting a lot of weird stuff, so I'm probably going to be switching maybe to Cubase, because I downloaded a demo of Cubase just to try this thing out, and actually liked it. So as far as those additional functions, that's really all that's different. Everything else is the same. So if I want to add a preset, I go through that exact same process. I pick whatever I want. Okay, I want to use the Summit thing, and this is a guitar track, so I want this acoustic guitar preset loaded on there. So that those features and that functionality is exactly the same for all of them. You just get the extra benefit of some additional controls there. Okay, so the last example is just showing you the differences with Cubase. So I'm using, I think, Cubase Elements LE, the free version, 10.5. So just a trial version, and this will allow you to do something different. So let's get rid of that message, and I've got my tracks down here at the bottom. There's drums, bass, guitar, etc. I'm going to go to the guitar track, and I'm going to insert the Console 1 plugin on that track. So Softube Console 1. All right, so now if I turn this on, now here's the interesting thing. This does not support the advanced Console 1 features such as automated track name and number, which I already talked about. So this just means I'll have to go in and I'll have to name these tracks individually, which is kind of a pain. You do that actually in the plugin, so you get this thing out of the way. You open up this Console 1 plugin, and then I would just have to say, okay, this is the guitar track, the Guitar track, the guitar track, whatever. So now I have that here. It doesn't exactly match the track name that I have there, but that's something just to be aware of. If your DAW doesn't support it, you'll have to do that. So now, really, the only differences that you'll have, if I close this and I open up the settings icon, here's the things that this will support. So this will just support that external sidechaining option, but it won't support anything else in the Console 1. So I'll have to kind of manually go through, and if I add all of these plugins to all of these. Which other ones do I want to use? I'll put this on bass and I'll put this on the drum track as well. So now if I open this up, I have my 4 tracks here, and because I copied the plugins, the track names are different, so I'd have to go back in. And you can't double click these to rename the tracks, so this isn't really a huge deal. It's more of just a complete irritation. So if I wanted to go in and update this, I'll have to change this to drums. I'll have to go into the bass track, clear that out of the way, close that, open this up, change this to bass, etc. And then go back into my last one and just change this to bass audio. So that's not really that big of a deal, but it can be a bit of an annoyance if you already have an existing project and you just have to go in and type all this stuff once. So it's kind of cool that Logic supports it, but it's awesome that Reaper supports everything. So if I close that and I go into the actual settings, these are the 2 options that were not available in the other DAWs. So being able to rename the tracks and rearrange the tracks. So rename, use the track selectors. Okay, I want to rename, I want to fix that typo on track 1. So now that pops up and I can rename that there. And the other thing that you can do is if you go back into those settings, rearranging tracks is pretty cool. So it would be really nice if this worked in one DAW, because being able to rearrange tracks would be pretty cool. I mean, I usually start from templates anyway, so my stuff is already set up, but it would be really neat just to be able to move something. So I want to move my guitar track to be the end. So I now want to put this on track 5, so I can move that track, which is pretty neat. So other than those features, really everything else is exactly the same again. So if I wanted to load a different channel strip, I want to load my American Class A, same thing. Everything is going to work exactly the same in every DAW except some of those additional features. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to go over in the video is just general usage of using this every day. So you can see from my setup, this is kind of how I have things set up. My main editing window is usually the monitor here, and my mixer and just other quick window settings are down here in my Mac. Now, because the Console 1 doesn't have a transport control, you'd actually have to buy the fader unit to stack on top of it, which does have the transport control on it. That's the one thing that I suppose if you really wanted to, you could MIDI map it to a few of the keys that you don't use, and I'll save that one for another video. But I'll use this for my transport controls with my shortcuts. So I can basically get a good position here where I don't really have to look at the keyboards or anything. So it's very easy to just feel your way through what tracks you're going to be selecting here, and then the options that you're going to be going through here, because you'll just get to learn and memorize where all the controls are. So from an ergonomic standpoint, it's a really good setup. It's nice and small, so you can kind of just plunk it down here on your lap if you want to sit here with your eyes closed and just mix with your ears instead of your eyes. So I think they've done a really fantastic job with it. I would absolutely buy this thing again because it's very easy to use. So despite that rocky start of just not even being able to get that free plugin, which I think is kind of dumb, it is a fantastic device and I would definitely recommend it. So last thing for day-to-day use is I have my iPhone set up recording kind of a little part of this video, but normally I'll use this stand here and I'll use the transport control on the Logic remote on the iPhone. I'll put a screenshot up here so you can see what that looks like. And then I kind of get the best of all worlds. I can have this set up here and then I can have my iPhone kind of right down here beside my Mac, and I can use that as the transport control. And then I can sit here and mix without having to worry too much about, you know, moving the mouse and doing all this other kind of stuff. So I think it's very, very well thought out. So final thoughts and wrap up. Really, the killer feature is that everything just works out of the box as it says. One thing I would like to see it have is better, I guess, and more consistent integration with DAWs out there. So being able to rename and move tracks is kind of a cool feature. not a deal breaker. The ability to control the sends and the volume and panning is something I would really like to see in Logic, so I might actually end up switching back to Reaper again. I started using Logic. I switched to Reaper for a bit because Logic is a bit of a pig, but to be honest, I'm so used to Logic. The UI is so much better and easier to use. I went back to Logic. Now I'm actually thinking about switching back, which is a bit of an annoyance. But if it worked the same in all the DAWs, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. So make sure you check out that chart about what features are supported. But again, remember, once you have it plugged in and turned on, it's actually going to auto detect what features your DAW has and turn those things on. So I would say, finally, to wrap it up, the thing I like about this the most is the ability to control all of the Softube plugins that I already invested in before I bought this thing. So being able to switch the shape, EQ, and compressor to all of those different plugins that I already own from Softube is fantastic. And again, it's very easy to use. Hardware construction is very solid, except for a couple of those little rattles that I don't know what is going on there, but at least it all works fine. So if you have a question about the Console 1, drop it in the comments below. The next video I'm going to do is controlling other plugins by using MIDI mapping. I did a bit of a teaser of that in this video, so you can check that out. But I'm going to look at using transport controls. So, maybe mapping these last 5 track controls to be my transport controls. So in the meantime, if you do have any questions about the Console 1, drop it below. I'll do my best to answer. Remember to like and subscribe. You'll get notified when that comes out. And I'll see you on the next one.